Excited to have Lee Hammond on with us from High Touch. I had a conversation with Lee almost a month ago, and I was like, Lee, you gotta join our Data Sharks. This is great content. I love industry topics on data, and Lee has a great background in the music industry, which is has its own quirks and whatnot, and that's why I wanted to have you on, Lee, so you could kind of share that with us and go through it. So thank you for joining us.
Glad to be here. So music's
Rich
a
will be
fun
joining
topic.
us in a minute. He'll pop in, I'm sure. So what I want to start with, Lee, is give us a little bit about your background and flow into that. A little bit about the music industry. Tell us, not so much data right now, but give us a little bit about the music industry and how it's been changing as you started your career and moved through it.
Sure. So I started out as a creative in the music industry, which was surprising to people who know me now because I'm so focused on fan data and customer data in general.
Yep.
But I got there originally actually from doing concert posters to being an art director.
Nice.
Which was fun. It was really great. This is go-go 90s, some of my favorite period of music. And then the internet showed up, and I just was, as a hobby, I started playing with it.
Mm-hmm.
And then I went off and did a couple of startups. I joined a couple startups in the Bay Area, left the music business temporarily, but what you could do with the internet then was so primitive. These were just so static and
Mm-hmm.
not in a static decoupled way, just hard-coded
Mm-hmm.
HTML. So I returned to the music industry, but it moved over to more of the interactive marketing. So I was developing first artist sites and user experience.
Mm-hmm.
And the main problem, the category problem that I encountered with the music industry. So I'm going to take you through interesting aspects of this, which are music industry, the development of sites, the developments of stores, the developments of everything to launch an artist. Used to follow the same physical manufacturing timelines as a CD and piece of vinyl, 6-week lead times. As everything's moved toward digital, the time frames to post something.
So it took 6 weeks from the very beginning of the music's available to now we can get it in front of people.
Pretty much. I mean, but I think 6 weeks is was the fast version. But I'm talking about you have to go
super happy path.
Well, that's designing an album cover, getting it approved, shipping it to a factory to manufacture it. Now, I'm talking real old school.
Yeah.
But that's kind of the world we were living in was there wasn't any streaming media. There was the beginning of download stores, so you could get singles up really quick, but the album cycle was also nobody was releasing digital downloads before the physical album was in a store. So what I had to do as my first order of business was, okay, how do we build lots and lots of sites, one for each artist, lots of stores, lists, and initially have a comfortable period, 3 to 4 weeks to build that, getting it down to weeks as things transition to all digital. So I think what I like to say is we had a factory model that felt like we were producing snowflakes for our artists who were very demanding that it looked very, very bespoke. And I think thankfully the decoupled front end and the maturity of modern CSS let us have a robust underlying framework, but everybody felt like they were getting something new and different. But and so I cut my teeth basically learning to scale the business at a label and building in vendors and technologies. And this will relate to what we talk about later. At the time, I worked at a label, and then I worked at the central business unit that was part of marketing and distribution. IT was not really part of the support system because they had other primary initiatives, supply chain, reporting, and related to reporting royalties. So there's a very, you have to account for every CD sold, every track played. So those groups had that was where, in a wholesale market, that was where the business was needed. But I was also experiencing the growth of social media in the digital marketing space,
Mm-hmm.
and simultaneously wanted to tap into that, but also saw what would happen as a major artist could point massive amounts of traffic with a single tweet.
Mm-hmm.
So our IT group was wary of the cloud at the time. This is going back to the, you know, early aughts or late aughts, I should say, maybe 2011, 12. But I saw our fixed hardware melt when Gaga pointed at it. So Lady Gaga.
So,
So that began my journey in working with SaaS vendors and companies. It was just that IT wanted to own some of the infrastructure, but I was finding that I could find a CMS and a solution that matched our factory model of building sites and allow us to spin things up quickly, have management, governance, and control, and hosting, all for probably less than what we were paying for our fixed hardware because they were
and
already on the cloud.
and let me replay that a little bit. So you were creating for the artists like a like an album site, right? Where all of the content that was related to that album. So if the artist tweeted out, "Hey, check out my new album," a huge audience would come hit the site, would crash the site, just due to the scale issues. How did you solve that initial problem? You just went to the SaaS
Uh,
vendors and said, "Hey, we got some scale needs here."
I mean, this is old. This is old. This is the transition to the cloud in general.
Hmm.
But eventually, the point was the relationship that the vendor, the hosting provider we had basically said, buy as much capacity as your peak volume. We have no way to dial it down or up. So that's why I started looking outside of our internal preferred IT vendor. And there's nothing wrong
Yeah,
with it. It's just, they just weren't, it was new for everybody. This
yeah, yeah.
kind of ability to drive traffic so quickly. So, and these were the official sites. So while they had the music section, a lot of artists still needed them to promote their tour dates. There's oftentimes
Hmm.
two main, I'll say, high traffic cycles: the release of the album, the various singles, and then the announcement of the tour dates. And those still become sort of the source of truth for fans to say, what are the actual tour dates? They don't immediately go to, say, Ticketmaster until they kind of validated that it's there. That's funny. That
Hmm.
still continues to this day, even though there's lots of ways to discover tour dates.
Yeah.
But what I would like to say is I sort of solved a horizontal scaling problem and a vertical scaling problem. And what I mean by that is, how can I build lots of something, replicate
Hmm.
it? That's what I mean horizontally. And then vertically, how can that single site, now we'll get to current times, Billie Eilish, scale up and down when traffic's there. So, we established a site solution that allowed us to do that. We also then moved into e-commerce in a similar fashion. And we also worked both on CRM. We started with Salesforce Marketing Cloud. We moved on to another solution
Hmm.
after a while for various reasons. And we also added global analytics. Again, it was a very decentralized organization.
Right.
And there's still a fair amount of that. There's more centralization within a given country or territory.
Sure.
But when I started, there were like four of me, one for each major North American label. I was at Interscope. My colleagues were at Republic, Def Jam. I'm blanking on one. UMG Nashville. So
Hmm.
what we started to see, and this is what happened as I started to develop scalable solutions, my team was pulled to the center. We started to consolidate some of this work, and we started working across the board because there was no real value in coming up with 4 different ways to build a website
Yeah, yeah.
at the label level. It was commoditized. So that became a shared service. But the thing that was also troubling to me and troubling to executives at UMG, and I say troubling, maybe I don't know if that's the right term for it, but here we have all these touch points for fans, but they're at the artist, and the artist will say artist or brand level. So we know who they are, we know they engage with that artist, and we know, but we can't really know if they would also, that's the same person on this other website, or that's the same person on this store or on this
Mm.
mailing list. this is the thing that I felt like, God, why can't Universal be as why can't its audience size, the collective fans, be as big as reviewed in aggregate
Mhm.
across all these touch points? Because, and it wasn't trivial to sort of say, well, I don't just add them all up. It's not
Yeah.
easy to do this. And in fact,
No.
that is this whole category of customer data platform has emerged
Yeah.
to solve for that. But one of the other things I even did before that is I implemented single sign-on across all these sites. We had a unique take on single sign-on because we wasn't purely to give us your email and password. We also wanted you to connect your social accounts. So if you connected your Facebook or your Twitter, but later on, and this
Mhm.
is where it really grew, is we built fan connections with music. So if they log
Mhm.
in with Spotify, and if we ask their permission, that would allow us to personalize our communications. So this is something that I saw happening out in the startup ecosystem, and I wanted to replicate it at Universal. So there's two good companies. One is called Songkick, and one is called Bands in Town. They have a direct consumer play, but they basically ask if a fan if they can monitor their Spotify for
Mm.
what their new artists and favorite artists are. They'll send them alerts and updates when that artist is showing up in their geography.
Mhm.
And that still, to me, is pretty magical. I don't have to tell some system
Yeah.
I like this new artist. It just shows up, and it's still
Right.
better than almost all the recommendation algorithms I see out there.
Right.
Uh,
Right.
and it's better than even the ones that are sort of sitting inside of the streaming services themselves. I know Spotify
Right.
has some capability here, but it's just not quite the same. So
Right.
I I said, wow, let's see if we can deliver that. But instead of just in addition to tour dates, talk about merchandise, new albums, releases. So that was my first foray into really understanding the consumer and their data, although I might call it their profile and
Mhm.
interests, but really at the end of the day, it's data. And then I
You know
would
what? One thing I would
go
just
ahead.
wanna comment on, it's so interesting. You start in content. You started your career in content, production, literally in content production, like painting
Right,
stuff, right?
right.
And, so you have this monolith IT department on the other side. You're on the content side producing websites, and it seems like the industry just did this,
It
as
took
your
a
career
it,
went along. Like,
it,
in
it
other words, this big production factory of producing records and physical material and all this stuff just just kind of shifted over to, okay, who's talking to the customer or who's in front of the customer? That's the person that's going to attack this thing.
I think that's I think that's fair. I think that's right. I mean, and honestly, social media is a way for the artists themselves to create content
Yeah.
and interact with fans. But and we all the major labels are I having lived inside that universe. I'm not going. They are professional and
Yeah. Yeah.
succeed when the artist succeeds. I want to get
Hmm.
away from any sort of major label bashing. I know
Yeah.
there's stories of bad contracts, but in general, everybody that I ever worked with was a music fan first that found themselves,
Right.
and they were trying to figure out a way to make the artist big as possible. And then the artist makes money through a bunch of different ways, from touring,
Yeah.
merchandise, sponsorship, and recording. But the primary, like the initial VC for almost any musician, is the recording label that invests in their future and gives them money to go record an album.
Now, was the digitization of the music, was that what made that happen, or like, well, obviously Apple had an impact on the music industry. Um, Tell me a little bit about that transition, the industry wide, how that kind of changed things while you were in your career.
I'm gonna be for those in your audience who are too young to remember this. There was definitely a period where iTunes rolled out as a way to rip CDs
Yeah.
and
That's right.
rip CDs. Maybe some of your audience won't
I
know what that
remember,
means,
yeah.
but it means ways to download and put the CDs that you purchased into um, iTunes, which
Digital
was
media,
great.
yeah. Yeah.
But that's how we also got into piracy and all this other stuff. Labels were really troubled by that. And then iTunes comes out, and they have an e-commerce storefront to purchase albums and singles, but everything on the lots of disruption here. Well, I'll give you the simplest example. The primary model was for many, many years, this going back to the 50s to the late 90s, have a hit single, people buy the album. People don't buy singles or
Right,
so.
right. They buy the
Just,
whole
yeah,
set for $20 rather than
right,
one
right.
song for 99 cents.
So iTunes comes along and it's allowing you to buy just that one song you loved for 99 cents. And all your marketing spends had to be rejiggered and everything like that. So it's not a trivial thing to adjust to that. Ultimately, at the end
Yeah,
of
I
the
know.
day,
Yeah.
iTunes pushed the industry to that point, but there was some pain and hurt along the way as
Did
people adjusted to this new environment.
now out of curiosity, did how did that get negotiated? I mean, I have someone who knows the music industry in front of me, and I love music. So how did Apple make that happen? We'll get back to data in a second. I just need to know, how did Apple negotiate that?
Well, I don't think they were first by any
Okay,
stretch.
so okay.
Meaning there was a small. Back in the early days, that they called it new media,
Uh-huh.
and so basically, let me give you we'll deviate here. There are traditional roles that used to exist in the music business, like publicity and sales and radio promotion. And then there was this other group called new media, which actually had kind of all of that, but only for these new kinds of channels. Publicity would be
Within the publisher.
within the new media marketing group. So
Okay.
effectively, you had people who did PR for the online publications like Pitchfork.
I
And
see.
you
I
had
see.
salespeople dealing with the e-commerce digital down stores like eMusic
So
and
they
places.
saw a future in it and were starting to dabble in, like, hey, let's try and sell our music. But there was no central body that was selling it all. It was just
Oh,
bits and
what
pieces. Okay.
right, and what's happened over time is all of those areas, everything's digital now. So there's
Yep.
no sort of category divide between digital channels and physical channels. And
Right.
now in 2022, we're pretty much
Yeah.
how close do we? We're still healthy vinyl play, still see CDs in Target, but we kind of know it's shifted significantly.
Yeah.
But in the early days, the minority representation were in these evolving new channels. Ringtones was big business for a minute, and that was another category.
Yeah.
So a lot of adjustments. All of these, by the way, get negotiated with the content providers to various degrees. So
Hmm.
each major label has a business development group and that talks to Apple, Spotify, YouTube, Amazon Prime,
Hmm.
Amazon. So and they cut these deals, and these are and this is where this is a significant part of the business. It's an important part of the business, and they try and get the best royalties for the labels, the artists. They also try and get the most data back that they can get back to understand the business and report on royalties. So we'll get to that. Why that's going to be instrumental in how we talk about the big transition from a data perspective.
So would it be fair to say that in today's market, there's a lot of weight put on the negotiation of a song or something, an album or a song that comes out between the record label and, say, YouTube, and and would it be fair to say there's an intense negotiation that happens there, or is it all sort of set in stone?
No, I would say most of these deals are 2 or 3 year deals that are
Okay.
renewed or readjusted. So there's not a per artist play.
Yeah. Yeah.
Occasionally, some artists, again, we're really talking about formats,
Yeah.
and written into a lot of artist contracts are you can sell my content as a CD or a vinyl, but I'm not giving you carte blanche to turn it into whatever format comes along next.
Hmm.
So anyone who watched the evolution of Spotify and Apple, there were big days where all of a sudden Led Zeppelin's entire catalog, which has been sitting off to the sidelines, showed up on
Yeah.
one
Yeah.
day. Even
I
though
remember.
the rest of I think that's Atlantic Records, has already on there. It's because they said not until we feel like the time's right. Same thing happened with the Beatles.
Yeah. Beatles
But
was a
for the
big one.
most part, most everybody now wants is. I think that's also in the rearview mirror. I don't think there's very many holdouts anymore.
Right. Right. Right.
And but let's. I don't want to jump ahead, but we're getting
Yeah.
close to where I saw some impacts in two ways that I want to make sure might be interesting for your audience. So if you can imagine what the analytics and reporting team looked like in those early days, they were reporting on CD sales. And then iTunes comes along and they're reporting on download sales. And they're through a retailer. So it's, Tower Records or iTunes. And it's a one-time event, maybe some store data, geographic data about the store location, but not a whole lot more than that. And that's what drove a lot of the insights in reporting. You get to streaming, two things sort of happen. In negotiating those contracts, the labels need per play events, and they wanted a pretty granular level for their own insights, and also to account back to artists how many times something was played. So
right, because there's not a singular transaction that's happening there. It's a frequency thing, right?
Yeah, I mean, this is where labels, I think there's a combination. We need it for reporting, and we want to understand our consumer by proxy. Now, no consumer data is, addressable consumer data is provided at all. It's simply an anonymized ID that says this anonymized ID played this track, and it's only for the content the label has licensed. So it's not for all content on Spotify. It's just for in this case, Universal Music Group's content. So we get a play event with a timestamp, perhaps a store location, but enough data to see that. And then because the anonymized ID is persistent, you can sort of see the related content or artists or music they're listening to, as well as skip events, maybe add to library events, what playlist it was on. So we're getting around, I'm going to say 2015, to 2017. What I saw from our BI team, and I worked closely with them, but we were more parallel because I was very intrigued in I was interested in what they had, but they didn't really manage addressable data, what I would see direct marketing data that I was dealing with. So, but I saw our team realize that our current data infrastructure was inadequate for what was going to be delivered daily by our streaming providers. And it's only gone up and up and up since 2015, but there was a bit of I think they did a bake-off between some of the big cloud providers. So they went, there was BigQuery, there was Redshift, and Snowflake was, I think Universal might have predated Snowflake or wasn't a consideration too early. Universal adopted a strong relationship with the Google Cloud, BigQuery platform. And they said it's just because the massive amounts of data they can move that.
Right.
And I know I've since learned that, the other major labels are either on BigQuery or Snowflake, and for the exact same purposes.
Sure.
So I call this, for me, this is not unlike what a lot of other businesses are seeing, but I can relate it back to this service that everyone kind of likes and a category people like, music.
Now, let me ask you a question about this, if I may. This collection of data, it's obviously coming from, say, Apple or Google Music or whatever, whoever, right? So it's this streaming, it's about the streaming music. And I can imagine one of the big reasons to have this data is so that you can effectively negotiate, or, it is kind of a trust. You're kind of trusting the vendor to give you the right information about how many. There is a big trust there, isn't there? Like, you're sort of trusting Apple to give you correct information about how many plays something's getting, because I would imagine if they give you a lot of plays, you're going to expect more money in the next negotiation round. Or is that just not even a conversation or anything anybody worries about?
I don't think anybody.
Okay.
I mean, we're dealing with. You have to also recognize, and again, this is where Spotify really was a pure play service. They showed up to provide a streaming solution where very, very few others had succeeded. Rhapsody was there first.
Yep, I remember.
But it didn't quite take off. Spotify really did a great job. their revenue depends. They don't generate. They didn't have a podcasting platform, so they were very content dependent. So I think there's a trust relationship and a mutual need, which is
Okay.
the labels also aren't stepping in and creating streaming services. So they're not in the Disney Plus, HBO Max
Sure.
space where they're competing as a distributor or retailer customer touch point. So I
So it's
think
almost
there's
like they're going together to market, not so
right,
much you know,
right, and
competitive.
I think they're negotiating, like I said, primarily royalties, maybe debating the rules of the road around what data do you need for reporting, what data can we share, and I don't, I'm not up. It may have even changed since 2020 when I was last at Universal,
Sure.
but the idea here is some transparency while respecting the end consumer's privacy about,
Yeah.
and then two things happen that the reporting got just you're able to account back to artists, and the data team built fantastic dashboards to tell them by geographic region what track, what platforms, how much was ad supported to YouTube, how much was subscription based,
Hmm.
and so the benefit of what they were able to build sitting on top of a modern data stack was really impressive. And in fact, that's
Did you
what got
see
me
it
to lean
change
in.
the behavior of the artists?
Let's
In
see.
other words, did they go out and maybe promote in different areas, or was it just more
Yeah,
like a thing to keep them close to the label?
I think the managers. I I don't want to paint too broad a brush. I think the artists probably, just like anybody, really are probably generating a fair amount of their original content on these social channels, and
Hmm.
they have the access to see the reaction. So I think that likes and follows through social media
Yeah.
probably resonates in a way that play counts don't. But I mean, I think ever since, even again an old reference, ever since MySpace started showing friend counts and play counts on MySpace pages, there was always a bragging rights for artists to say, "Look, I
Yeah.
have more
Yeah.
friends than you. I have more. Uh, I got more plays than you." So there's a lot,
Yeah.
and my two boys now just like to tell me how many plays they see on Spotify. So I tend to think, God, everybody's a data scientist nowadays.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
my younger son was just bragging about, I'm following this artist that I know is going to be big, but they only have 10,000 followers,
Uh-huh.
and
Uh-huh.
he's probably going to be right because he gets into stuff early. Um, so um, so what I've seen, and this is mirrored in other enterprises after I left Universal, but it's a great way for me to learn to see this firsthand. And when I got to High Touch, I understood. And for those who don't know, we'll get to this later, but High Touch takes a data warehouse and allows you to take that data and not just report on it, but if you got customer data that's actionable and addressable, email addresses, phone numbers, whatever, and you want to use it in your marketing channels, you can build segments off of that. We help connect your data warehouse to TikTok, Facebook ads, your email CRM solutions. And so we're doing that at scale, and we're finding lots of customers who've moved on to the modern data stack. And we
Hmm.
often talk about this as data activation. And another way we talk about it is don't stop at BI. You've got more data in your organization that can drive the bottom line, not just report on the bottom line.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
that's us. But that's a preview of what we'll maybe end up on here.
Yeah.
But um, what
And
I go ahead.
well, no, I was gonna say. So, what were the things that got phased out as you went through that transition? So, was it all the on premise stuff? I'm assuming that got all
Yeah,
phased out.
yeah.
Um,
We
you know,
I think
talk about the transition just for a second in terms of, did the resources just get moved to the cloud, or was it more like you just started hiring more members to your side of the house?
a bit of both, but also, you know, uh, so what I saw happen is while I sort of moved off of our internal fixed hardware store for a vendor who was on top of the cloud, because I needed SaaS solutions. I wasn't able to bring in and staff,
Mhm.
people to build an end-to-end, the engineering, the entire cloud stack. And so somebody who specialized on that. So Acquia is a company I've worked with that provided the site factory for Drupal.
Mhm.
There are similar ones for WordPress, but these ideas that you're going to
Sure.
build many, many, many. So they provide. I believe at the time they were on AWS, and so they managed all that. Now our IT group, not much long after that, started moving towards the cloud for internal purposes,
I see.
and even
So they
started
saw
helping.
what was happening.
Right, right. And over time they became more interested in the digital marketing space, but that's fairly recent. I'm not saying that's 2019, 2020.
Wow.
Um, because again, it's a wholesaler business for the most part. There is a
Right.
direct consumer channel in e-commerce, but when you're a wholesaler, there's a slightly different mix in the organization. Now, 2022, everybody's got an arm of direct consumer in any part of their organization,
Yeah,
and
that
also,
is interesting that it is a wholesaler business. I wouldn't have thought of music industry as wholesaler, but it's true because you're selling a 3-year contract, or you're selling a with the amount of interaction you're having with a direct audience. It's a very different industry because you're having a lot of seemingly direct contact with consumers, but you're on a wholesale market, or you're selling at a wholesale level. It's a very different uh,
it
kind of
and
business.
the music business is a collection of different categories of business, and for example, recorded music business is a wholesale business. The ticketing business is primarily a direct transaction business. However, there are areas where it's not clear if the artist or manager gets any access to the ticket buyer data. Maybe the venue does. So
Yeah.
that's an area I don't want to speak. That's not my primary area, but we're seeing anybody who's got transactional level data. We're seeing this in back at High Touch in the industry, has got a lot of things that if they're reporting on it, they've got customer identifiers at scale. I think the reason the music business or the recorded music business continues to do well is that the e-commerce has only grown. It was amplified during COVID. There were no touring going on during COVID, so it's not the same as the primary revenue is streaming, but
Right.
as a
But it
music
probably
entity,
evens out the spread of cash flow by
right?
being able to sort of supplement with e-commerce business transaction, frequent transactions, because you're going to get the big contract, but then you'll have those little e-commerce transactions in between.
Well, and there is a lot to be said about what people call the super fan business, but these are the core fans who spend a lot on high margin, exclusive products. So catering to that audience, there's a lot of great things that can be done with artists and and artists catering to their fans, because the reach of social media is so challenging. It started out in a place where you could reach all your fans, but more and more that's harder to do. So artists have never really given up on owning their direct fan connections, even if it's just
Hmm.
the mailing list. But more and more, it's an e-commerce store. It's a mix, but there's basically a broad channel mix. Maybe is a
So
better way to put it.
today, let me try and describe what I think it looks like today. Tell me if I'm wrong. So today you have the primary streamers out there, um, all sharing data to the record labels. And this is, I would presume, a constant feed of information that the record labels have had to generate data warehouses to analyze. Um, and then the record labels are kind of churning that information, providing it out to the artists so that they're aware of their, how they're performing, how the records are doing, and whatnot. And then you've got the e-commerce business that is, churning its own data, kind of fills in some revenue. Um, is that a good snapshot of how they're consuming data today?
Yeah, I'd say that's about right. There's the direct marketing channels and the B2C, let's call it. And direct marketing, I am lumping in e-commerce in there, but there is also, you know, the artist website, the artist store, and the mailing list. But yes, everything that you're able to touch a fan directly, and social media, we're putting in sort of a second arm's length away, massive audience for an artist, but
Hmm.
you sort of owned and operated by the social platform.
And
So,
each one of these record labels has have had to set up their own sort of analytic landscapes to deal with these streams of data. I mean, it's so much data. This is the thing, like it's a lot of data. It has to be a ton of data. I mean,
oh,
what's the volume that you guys that they're dealing with?
I'm gonna get it wrong if I say it, but it's so massive and it's delivered daily. It was so yeah. At this point, it's been running for a while. It is also interesting, and this is a side note. Um, this as it relates to data, a lot of the endpoints that you're ingesting data from are very proprietary or unique to
Interesting.
Apple or Spotify. So for some of our customers, Warner Music Group is a customer of High Touches,
Hmm.
and they really um, like our product for a number of reasons in terms of being able to take audiences, that e-commerce audience, and some of the and promote them to look fans on TikTok when new products come out and things like that. But they're not a. But the other side of that I thought in this modern data stack, where I've sort of started to understand companies like Fivetran that provide a whole library of
Yeah.
getting data into the data warehouse. Surprisingly, not a lot of that happens at the major label system because everything is too small and bespoke to have a pre-built connector via Fivetran.
Interesting.
Uh,
So
so
the
there is an ETL team that is
really,
building
so
pipelines into the
are
data
they
warehouse.
dropping a file onto you, or is it a stream?
I don't know. I think it was. It felt like it was an overnight big data
Wow.
dump. But that's again, this is
That's 2 years
when
back, but
at least 2 years back, and was not my primary gig. This was sort of like, okay, that's great. I see what's happening, but
right.
how do I touch these people? How do I tell the fans about this? So I had a different data set of customers, and so maybe
Sure.
let's talk about.
Yeah, let's do that. So you got the data onboarded, we got the data warehouse. What were you doing with that, particularly with high touch? What would you do with that, and how would you automate it?
So, well, let me get right to that, but let's talk
Yeah.
about how I tried to solve this first with
Yeah,
what's
please.
called a CDP or customer data platform.
Yeah.
So the two sort of problems that I wanted to do. Imagine a thousand artist sites and 1,000 artist stores, and all these underlying applications, Drupal and Shopify underneath,
Yep.
and trying, and then a Salesforce Marketing Cloud instance with 1,000 mailing lists and click engagement. And I'm trying to say what's the overlap, how many unique users, and what's the affinity for across these artists.
Mhm.
So I did talk about rolling out social single sign-on, but then the next thing I thought is these emerging customer data platforms seem to solve what I'm looking for, and they have a few components to them. One is they drop in typically some JavaScript into your
Mhm.
site as an event collector or your store, and they capture click events, and they then ingest that into an internal their version of a data warehouse, not your data warehouse,
Right.
but their
Right.
data warehouse. And they run some identity resolution to say that the person on the Shopify store is the same person that's on this mailing list that signed up for this newsletter over here or
Mhm.
interacted. They also can do some pairing and join the anonymous to the known user when they see an authentication or a login event. Oh,
Yeah.
that cookie is now Lee Hammond. Let's do the entire cookie history of what he clicked on.
Right.
And when we started, and I think we were just the privacy world has moved so quickly, we thought we could anonymously join across domains back in 2018, and we could. The third party cookie wasn't dead yet at that point,
Yeah.
So I could see if somebody identified themselves on site A, and that was the same third-party cookie I saw on site B, I could create a whole rich profile. But customer data platforms enable the aggregation of all the customer touch points into a database. And then once they don't do that to report on it. In fact, the reporting's a little wouldn't meet the needs of an enterprise. What they allow you to do is build audiences and segments and say, oh, give me all the Billie Eilish fans, or
Right.
let me do a hybrid of the Billie Eilish fans and this other artist because they're on tour or they're on a featured track together. And then let's activate that and move it out to advertising to make people aware of it. So there's a component of a CDP is this activation layer that allows you to model audiences, build them, and push them out to whatever channels and systems you want. So I rolled out a CDP in 2019, hoping to sort of solve my anonymous issue, my cross-domain issue, and my unified customer and activation issue. There was a host of reasons that was problematic. And I sort of thought maybe we hadn't picked the right CDP, or there was a little bit of challenges within UMG. So I thought, okay, not everybody's on the same page.
Right.
Truthfully, that happens in every enterprise. So what I learned is, in order to productize a CDP, you have to come up with a pretty rigid user model. And that rigidity really is where we were challenged by our CDP. What I mean is, in our view, we want to understand you as a music fan. So we don't want to just know your name and age, and we want to know your affinity for thousands of artists. And that just is not a thing you can cookie cutter in. So I after going out and consulting and doing some work in the field and talking to my colleagues at Warner Music Group, who were also around 2020 looking at a CDP to address the very same problems, they brought in a very smart data person from NBC Universal who worked on Snowflake there and was enriching and betting, I guess, maybe double or tripling down on Snowflake within Warner Music Group to address not consumer marketing, but all business problems. And high touch emerged in early 2021. And there's a category of data activation. Some people used to call it reverse ETL, but it's really just attaching to your data warehouse, your Snowflake, meaning Warner Music Group's data warehouse or Universal Music's data warehouse, and letting you build audiences directly on that.
Which makes sense because that's where your customers are, right? So,
well, and you've already ingested it already. Like I said, even when I did our CDP, and I thought we could port the data from the CDP into our data warehouse and point our BI tools on top of it. The data teams just couldn't make sense of it because it was a proprietary data model, sort of built for the CDP, but not built for consumer marketing. So they ended up re-ingesting all the same data into the data warehouse, all of our email data, all of our e-commerce data. So the CDP ingestion phase to get a report, if you still need to build it for a report, then why not just do it directly? So what's happened is what my colleagues at Warner's told me about is, Lee, do you know about reverse ETL and high touch? And this is in March of 2020. I'm like, no, this is interesting. I reached out to Tejas, our CEO, and a lot of the team at High Touch. In fact, this is Tejas is an engineer, CEO of the company. He worked at Segment, and for those in your audience, Segment is one of the biggest CDPs. Was acquired by Twilio. This is how long I've been around. I met with them when they were a tag management solution. So instead of using Google Tag Manager or something like that, they had their own version. Had some pretty cool secret sauce to it. But I remember in the demo, I said, so you're able to see that I can collect data from all these points and feed it out to these systems, but can you unify the data? And at that time, they could not. They didn't have a product for that. Well, our president, CEO Tejas, built their Personas product, which is unifying the data. And what did they build it on? I believe they built it on BigQuery.
Okay.
So there's no secret there. It's just BigQuery.
Yeah. Yeah.
He built the rules on that. And one of the things they helped companies use and activate their data was a thing called SQL traits, which let people build models with SQL queries against the data. And it's just the examples I gave you. Show me the people who bought this T-shirt in the last 5 days, but maybe haven't listened to this song or done this or done tour date or visited the site. He provided a SQL interface to that could get then piped out to advertising. So
Interesting.
what I think Tejas saw when he left is too many companies have data warehouses, and they don't need the CDP to provide the data warehouse anymore.
Right.
And so Tejas and Josh Curl also are from Segment went off and started working on this category, which again was nicknamed reverse ETL because people said, oh, it's kind of like Fivetran, but in reverse.
Yeah. Yeah.
No,
You're pushing data out from the data warehouse into other functions and needs.
Yeah. We've now landed on data activation, partly because, so when I met Tejas is probably in April or May of 2021. And I told him a bit of everything we've talked about on this podcast so far. And my role, because I'm not an engineer, I'm a marketing digital, I got into front end development, but it really is, he was like, you understand the problem in a way that most MarTech business people don't, which was a nice compliment. But what I meant is, well, I witnessed it. I witnessed all these things happen.
You lived through it.
I saw the growth of the data warehouse, not just in terms of we adopted it, but I saw the gravity it had in our organization. Because we threw a lot of in addition to reporting on it, we also there was a BI team and an analytics team looking at cohorts. If somebody listens to this track, what else do they listen to? Is that going to inform our marketing?
Yeah.
Well, that kind of data set helps us, helps the labels make better marketing, business, A&R decisions. So there's a lot of investment there. I wanted the same sort of recommendation engine to feed our recommendations out. Like if you're on the Billie Eilish list, or you like this Billie Eilish track, you may not know about these artists, but let me tell you about them because there's a lot of cohorts that look like you that are listening to them or going to their tour. So just to kind of circle, I brought in the CDP, and right before, after that big investment in our IT group, there was a minute where we sort of said, do we build or buy this CDP? And this is in 2018. And the IT said, we're getting pretty good with BigQuery. We think we can do this. And I said, that's great, but I don't want to just report on it. I want you to build these connectors out to all these ad systems. And I want you to build that.
Yeah. To TikTok and to,
And they knew that was a thankless, never-ending task. And they said, honestly, I can remember the meeting, and it was like, I think you should go with the CDP. And so now for people in our audience, that's why when I talked to Tejas and when I found High Touch, it's like, you mean I can get that part and not have to buy the ingestion part or the data warehouse part?
Data platform, all that.
Yep. And then they built these really good marketing friendly UI, because the other part of it is reverse ETL and building audience in SQL absolutely resonates for some, probably people on this podcast. Sure. However, a lot of my cohorts, marketers, digital marketers, need to see a visual UI that makes sense to the business that they're doing. I want people who did this and that, and I want to push them out. So we basically have built a front end, a marketer friendly front end for whatever your data warehouse is.
So speak to the push out part, because that's probably the part that my community would have no clue about. What was it like to do it by hand? Like, let's just say you're going to do some advertising on, say, YouTube or something. What was that like?
I can speak to this today. We see this CSV problem is still here to this day. and the example, it just literally, there's another entertainment company I'm talking to and they know the problem, the marketers know the problem, the data people know the problem. We're going to run this campaign. We know we have the best data in our data warehouse. Can you give me people who look like this?
Yeah.
And it's a request, and they go write a SQL statement, and they hand back a CSV.
Yeah.
And then they upload it by hand to whatever the ad platforms are. And rinse and repeat. And the big problem is what we're doing isn't that part. We're doing that part, but the way the marketer can build it. More importantly, the triggering and syncing mechanisms are cron, because especially in the music business, but a lot of entertainment and films and everything, people don't realize you're marketing an individual release, which has a short window, maybe a month. It's a month out from the album, the single comes out, maybe a video, then the album drops, and then 2 weeks. So 6 weeks might be the entire advertising cycle of a campaign. And so you're starting it, and you need to build audiences around that artist, because I think everybody knows that I'm a fan of an artist. You can't call me, I like hip hop or rock or whatever.
Yeah.
But that's too broad. It's got to be, I'm a Kanye guy, I'm a Drake guy, whatever it is.
Sure.
So, so people, our customers in the music space, are building audiences around artists, and they're building hundreds and just the same way I said there was a factory problem. They needed a solution that hundreds of people could build hundreds of audiences, sometimes thousands, and then one audience is a definition of who they are, and then pushing it out to 5 or different ad platforms, and then maintaining that every day. Because people, if one of your criteria is they bought something or didn't buy something, or they listened to something, or they clicked on this, they move in and out of the segment. So that's why these snapshot CSVs, there's not enough resourcing to go ask for that every day, update it, and send it. So our platform is this syncing engine that has all sorts of chronological, all the ways that you might want to trigger it. And then there's all sorts of, because we're a data company, all sorts of ways to, I think we have a Monte Carlo integration, and all sorts of ways to look at the data. If you're coming from the data engineering side of the house, you can use your DBT libraries to trigger audiences or build audiences. So there's a lot of data-friendly tools. What I'm more passionate about is our audiences product. Our core product has all that SQL and DBT interfaces, but from the people that I'm talking to, I'm saying, hey, your marketers can love this.
They would be having to pull down CSV files, publish them out to each one of these different platforms that they want to do advertising on. And then is that a daily routine that they'd be going through, just pushing out CSVs?
Yeah, and here was what I witnessed. I oftentimes saw people just this is just a weird problem, but I think people are too much work to do, not enough time.
Yeah.
So if the targeting that Facebook says, like, let me just target the Facebook fans of this page and call it done.
Yep.
They might do that because they've got to move on and check another box,
right?
Rather than use their internal data to get more return on investment for their ad spend. They have all the tools and data. In fact, when we could take the time to slow down and do it right, it always outperformed any of the sort of lower effort ways to build your audience. However, and this is where I have a respect for people having to do lots of things, just as another way to do it. So a lot of what people like about what High Touch does is it's a kind of set it and forget it. You only have to make that investment once. You can start the campaign, you can end the campaign, and you're getting much better, return on your ad spend or personalization, and you're using the real source of truth, which is in your data warehouse. You're not,
and you're not having to deal with just it's basically the plumbing is in place. So you have all the plumbing in place. You're just tweaking the bits and pieces that you really are interested in targeting, which I think is brilliant.
And it is the plumbing that people are happy that's a category that they don't have to maintain themselves.
So those endpoints that High Touch is touching, are they API endpoints from the target vendor that they're pushing into?
Yep. Okay. Yeah, and as you can imagine, this is why people debated the term reverse ETL.
Right, because
or whether ETL vendors like 5chan are going to try and enter the space. It is not trivial to feed out to API endpoints that have their own throttling.
It's different. It is very different. Yeah, because you're really interacting with an application a little more. One you're reading from an application. In this case, you're writing to an application. But I can definitely see where, one of the things I guess I've appreciated more about just in this conversation, artists need to listen to this conversation because do they know that all this is going on? Like it's no question partially why artists are so capable of, garnering such a following because there is a machine behind this.
Uh, you know, I think there's an appropriate amount of attention that this deserves,
Yeah.
and it's an area of the business.
Right.
So there are lots of important things that need to be decided when you're dealing with artists and talent and picking the decisions. I just was on a call yesterday with a manager who said, this is great. We're probably well, basically he wants to do what we're doing. However, he also knows for this big artist, he's trying to get a yes on a documentary he wants to get made about them. That's probably going to be, I don't know, it's an Apple TV or Netflix, I think.
Right.
But the main point is he needs to corral his band. That's a lot of challenging individuals to say yes to that. So you basically, I'm trying to say you pick your battles. Now, on the flip side, that's why I don't think our product is an artist by artist. Artists should know, and believe it or not, and this is what I said to the managers, if you're signed with this label, and I think I alluded to the Warner Music Group, I said, if you have artists on that label, they've got a very strong foundation for you. You don't need to touch it. Just say, give them the information and then support them and be partners. Because I think that's where you got excited. And so I think I'm not ruling all management companies. Some are getting bigger and more sophisticated with their own internal data teams. But in this stage, within the recorded music business, I'd say, or in the music business in general, you're going to see ticketing agencies have a massive data team, Ticketmaster, AEG, AXS, that also, not coincidentally, AEG is a customer of ours.
Mm-hmm.
And they do the same sort of things, but around using ticketing purchases as the audience building tool. And then they sit on top of another data stack or modern data stack. So, but what the commonality is, both of those entities aren't building a generic evergreen one audience.
Right.
They're going, this tour date's happening this date. I need to get people who look like this fan of this artist.
Right.
So
this has been so interesting. It really has given me a lot more context to the reverse ETL or audience activation space, because the need for the flexibility of it to be sort of less stringent than what a typical retailer might take, so that you could actually go to, for example, like you said, artists or other categories that might be not so common. But what that does tell me is that, High Touch's reach could be very, very broad. I mean, you could really hit a lot of interesting industries with that. So Lee, it's been awesome having you on with us. The hour just
yeah, there it is. Yes,
blew by. But I appreciate you jumping on with us and giving us some insight into the music industry, how it's changed and where it's going.
Oh, it's been a pleasure. I'm a music lifer, as they say, and I'm really enjoying the data lens and working with companies like yours. That's a new hat for me to wear. And it's been pretty exciting.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Lee. We'll put this one in the history books. Appreciate all that insight, and we'll catch you later.